Everyone knows it's a mango, Mangofera indica, so it comes from India. I won't tell you everything about every tree, but just a few things to know. And one thing we just rediscovered this morning, Lars and the Wex boys are digging one out over there. And I've always known that they were deep rooted, but you should see the size of the root on this tree. The trunk just keeps going down. You know, most trees, when you dig out a trunk, it starts to narrow. This is just going down the same size. So, unlike most fruit trees which have shallow roots, which means you can't do much under them. Mangoes are famous for being great shade trees. People can hang on, you know, you go to a village in India or South Pacific and the village market is under the mango tree. They tolerate compaction by human activity and horses and everything because they have these really deep roots, which also means they're drought tolerant and flood tolerant. They're a bit marginal here in terms of production, and that's because they come from a monsoon climate where you have a lot of rain and then none. And so what happens here is in September when they flower, if we get any rain, you get the anthracnose fungus, which weakens the stalk of the developing mango. And then you get a storm in October and it knocks most of the mangoes off. So the only years you get a bumper crop in Brisbane is when September is almost totally dry. Now it is our driest month, but we usually get some showers. So that's why typically here you might get a bumper crop every 6 or 7 years on average, but it just, when you look back and it's been that dry September. And then of course everyone's got them. But the other thing about them, if you don't want to grow a big shade tree, if you want to manage them more, you can keep them pruned. And the commercial people keep them pruned about 3 to 4 metres for ease of harvesting. And we've got 1 or 2 we've planted now, which we're trying to do that on. Because the trouble with these is, if they fall off the tree, they bruise, you know. So you've got to have multiple big, great long pickers or nimble people who can climb up and get them. So that's the mango. Any questions? Just yell out any questions as you go.
Do they fruit on new or old wood?
Now you've got me. Old wood, yeah, because you don't have to prune them.
Yeah. I'd just like to add that this mango tree had a particularly good sighting before the winter solstice. We had a boobook owl found in there.
All right.
And now I think the boobook owl's using these 3 mango trees as cover.
So this is an avocado coming into bloom, as you can see. And avocados have different varieties. And this is called a Hass, this one, H-A-S-S. And it's one of the better varieties for around here. And it's also, if you're only planting one tree, it's pretty well the only one to plant because most avocados need a different variety for cross-pollination to get good fruit set. And so if you're planting avocados, there's what they call type A and type B, and you're supposed to have one of each. But Hass is one that is pretty well self-fertile, so you don't need the cross-pollination. You probably would get slightly better fruit set if you did have it, but this tree still sets quite a lot of fruit each year. In terms of growing requirements, it's the exact opposite of the mangoes. The avocados are really intolerant of having wet feet. So they're really shallow rooted and they don't like clayey soil. So if you've got, like a lot of Brisbane's on clayey soil, so you've really got to mound them up and keep them well mulched. If they get wet roots, they get phytophthora, which is another bacterial infection that makes them die back from the top. But they're a good tree, as long as you can provide that reasonable drainage. And the drainage here is probably better because this is still flood prone. Drainage here is better than in a lot of backyards in Brisbane. But if you just put tambourine or toowoomba or springbok or maloney, they grow fantastically. They like that volcanic soil, good drainage, slightly cooler because they're native to the highlands of Guatemala and Mexico. And they were probably they've probably got such a narrow distribution because they were distributed by the megafauna. And when the megafauna died out, none of the other animals can swallow the big seed. So that's how they were travelled around.
How old do you reckon this tree is, Dick?
What's that?
How old do you think the tree is?
This one?
Yeah.
Oh, I know that was planted within about 3 or 4 years of starting, so it's over 20 years.
I can tell you because I planted it.
Oh, there you go.
And it would have been about 98.
98, yep. So there you are, 4 years
So
on.
21 years roughly.
It's 21 years, birthday. Just reached its maturity.
Yeah, can drink now, legally, in the US.
So the one in the middle at the back, it's totally bare. That's one of the few trees that grows around here that's deciduous. We'll see another one in a minute. So that's the Chinese raisin or Japanese raisin. And the fruit is actually like a thickened stalk. It's really quite sweet and does taste a bit like a raisin. And they seem to be pretty easy to grow. That one's much less, I planted that well after these others. But it does have, they're quite interesting fruit and it's easy to grow. And the other advantage, it is good having trees that are deciduous in terms of your permaculture design of a property, particularly ones that are deciduous in winter like that, because you can let the light in winter and then have a nice shade in summer. So this one here is the carambola, 5-corner fruit. It's another deep-rooted one that will tolerate weddings, funerals, parties underneath it. And it's looking a little bit funny now because its old leaves are dying and it'll start to get the new leaves soon. But it's has a lovely pink flower and then these fruit that are very juicy. Sometimes not a lot of flavour in the fruit, but this one in particular has more flavour than the one over there. Well, that one's juicier. So there are slightly different varieties. And it's one you can plant and then almost forget about it. It's drought tolerant, you don't have to worry about watering it or fertilising it or anything. The only thing is the fruit are fairly susceptible to fruit flies. And you do get, most of the fruit is in summer, but you often get a winter crop as well, which is usually fruit fly free. And the ones in summer you can often just cut around the fruit fly and chop them up in a fruit salad or something like that. So they're a really easy tree. This one here is the white chartreuse. It's also deciduous, as you can see. It's one of the mulberries. The mulberries aren't deciduous for very long. They'll lose their leaves for a week, maybe 3 weeks at the most, and then they'll leaf up. In fact, you can see it hasn't lost all its old leaves and the new leaves are coming. It's one of those mulberries that's long and thin and a pale whitey green colour, but they're incredibly sweet, much sweeter than the ordinary mulberries. So they're also a deep-rooted tree that doesn't mind everything else happening around them. And mulberries are very long, live for many years. So that's another one.
I remember that fruiting a lot a few years ago, but I'm thinking it hasn't been fruiting that much, or is it just that it's much taller, so...
I think the bats get to it.
The bats get to it, the birds get to them. The last year it had a lot of fruit on, but not a lot of it got to be ripe because... And the other thing is if you have a dry period, some of the fruit will drop if it's really dry. So some years it's good and some years it's not so good.
Is it relatively drought tolerant?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relatively drought tolerant, sure. And the thing about mulberries is you don't prune them. That's the other thing. We used to have lower branches and people keep wanting to lift the branches and cut them back. You should leave all those lower branches come in because they're a great... Mulberries are, I remember as a kid, you can spend hours as a kid playing inside a mulberry. And so we should leave those lower branches and leave them to be a magnificent big tree. And if you want a smaller one, you can get dwarf ones. And you can get a red chartreuse that's got a bit of spritzing, bit of sort of tang to it. This one is just straight sugar, whereas the red one has a more interesting flavour. I quite like the red one. You know it. Yeah.
It's a bit sour.
Bit sour, yeah, I like it. Okay, let's wander over here.
have a son or a child, is it?
No, it's genetic.
They always needed.
Yeah, I need to protect. Yeah, my grandfather had it. Vitiligo.
So this is the Jabuticaba tree from Brazil, particularly from the southern part of Brazil, Sao Paulo area, which has a very similar climate to here. And it's also called the Brazilian grape because it has grape-like fruit, but it's an unusual tree. You can just see it beginning to bud here. The flowers are just coming out and they're all on the trunks. So they're not out on the end of the branches like most fruit trees. See, look at this line. You can see the flowers out on the end. But this one, they're inside the tree, which is quite a useful feature because it means that it'll still fruit if you plant it in shade. And also you can use it as a hedge. So we haven't trimmed it recently, but we've done this as a bit of a demonstration. You can trim it back and keep it as a hedge and it will still fruit. I mean, things like lily pillies will be often...
Yeah, it is. That's the same tree.
What's that?
That's the same tree.
Yeah, this is the bottom and the top, yeah. So lily pillies you use as a hedge, but they're a good hedge, but you won't get any fruit because you're continually cutting off the growing tips and where the flowers are. So that's and the other thing about Jabuticabas is that you'll get 3 or 4 crops a year, but it's very slow growing initially, and it takes between 8 and 10 years, maybe even 12 years to get your first crop. So a lot of this family, the Myrtaceae, which includes the lily pillies and the Brazilian cherry and a few others, they're quite slow growing initially, but they're very hardy, drought tolerant, have this hedging, and they're quite beautiful when they come out and flower. They're just coming out now, so if you watch them over the next few weeks, you'll see these little tiny flowers up along the stem, and then over a few weeks they'll turn into purple fruits. They're a bit like a thick-skinned grape, probably not quite as sweet as a grape, and the skin has a bit of tannin in them, so most people spit the skin out, although you can eat it. But they do make wine out of them, you make jam out of them, drinks. So that's another good one for this type of climate, very much suited to this climate. And if you want to grow citrus, this is the best citrus for Brisbane. This is the Tahitian lime. And this one's another one that was probably planted back in about 96 or 7 or 8. So it's been, half of it was knocked off in a cyclone or a storm, and it just keeps coming again. And they fruit for about 9 or 10 months of the year, the Tahitian limes. They need a bit of water. They'll get a bit dry looking, but and they need, like all citrus, they need feeding regularly. And they're also a bit prone to the sooty mold. They've got a little bit here, but you can see the amount of flower and fruit they get on them. They're fantastic. Jerry Colby Williams pays his mortgage by making jam out of the fruit from one of these trees.
No.
What's that?
Try that jam. I don't know how he sells it.
Just the way he's named.
It tastes like lime skin. So tough. It's so, yeah.
You can also attract most of the swallowtails with most citrus plants anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a good one for the swallowtail butterflies. Yep.
What about the cactus?
Yeah, well, what about the cactus?
What's the history of the cactus?
It was planted early on. We thought we might attract Western film sets, No, but it does have an edible fruit, but they flower right up the top, and it's hard to get at the fruit. I have eaten one once. I mean, one year we had about 8 or 10 fruit. Do you know much about it?
No, what do you taste like?
Oh, it's slightly tangy. It looks like an apricot, sort of an orange flavour. It wasn't bad. Yeah, has quite a nice flower. But I don't know much about the cactus. I can't even know the name. Do you want to know the name of this one? No.
I think this one is used a lot for textiles.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Right, from the bark or the...
Size.
That you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
The size of
It's the size of them.
the size of Guava, yeah. There's it was a huge industry with making ropes and that in the south of Mexico. But, size of it was really one of
Right.
the big money earners, the Guava is one of them.
Oh.
But the fruit, I think, is delicious. I used to eat at least 10 a day. All different colours, red, green, yellow.
And do they keep them pruned in Mexico?
Huh?
Do
They
they
call
prune
it
them?
tuna.
Do they prune it back, or do they get as big as it?
All varying because it's wild,
Oh,
It's
yeah.
And they sell a beautiful, they call it agua miel, which is like honey water, and they actually cut it, and and then the liquids fill up, so it's like instead of agave syrup that's fermented, this is fresh, isn't it in agave? It's not in the agave family.
No.
Isn't it?
No, agaves
Yeah,
have the kind of
you're right.
form of an
You're
aloe
right.
vera,
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah,
flower.
it's all different. Yeah,
It's
you're right.
Yeah,
I'm
whereas
on another
this
track.
flowers, yeah.
Can
No,
you-
this is a different textile. But this also, you can make a textile from this one as well. But yeah, no, these ones, the flower is like a single
Yeah, all that the thing. Yeah, that's true. I'm on another track. I get very excited about it.
But they're both used for textiles.
So there you go. I didn't know much about it. But the rest of it. So this is a jackfruit, and they're a hardy tree that a bit variable in their fruit production. This one hardly has ever fruited for some reason or other.
No, I think it has fruited last year sometime.
Yeah, it had one or two.
Because he brought it into the kitchen, it was bigger than my circumference of my hand.
There's one out on Northey Street that has more fruit, and there's one over near Edgar Street that has fruit, and there's one over near the hostel that has fruit too.
So these have all been planted? All these ones you're showing us?
Yeah.
They've all been planted?
Yeah. No, it's not a native. It's a. I think it's another South American native originally, but I'm not sure. What's that? Indian, right. And they have these big fruit. You probably that have a sort of a spiky green outer covering, and you can eat them green, and they're becoming very trendy. You can make pulled pork equivalent for vegans, or you can let them get ripe, and then they're a sort of a deep yellow colour, and they're quite sweet, very rich. And you can roast the seeds as well. So they're quite a multi-purpose fruit. They're another one that seems that's deep-rooted, and they're a good shade tree. And so Indian villages, you'll find these around as shade trees.
How
But
long
yeah,
will
I've
it
been-
take to get to that?
what's that?
Sort of how long will it take to get to that height?
That's probably 15 years old.
15 years.
But
Did you find that one, Gavin?
The other thing we did here was we tip pruned it. We cut the tip out. If you don't cut the tip out, they just go really tall. And the one over in the back orchard, Bunya planted it, and he just one day he was walking past, he just went like that with his machete and left this jagged edge, and it's all, and it means it goes into a more spreading tree, whereas the one over on the Edgar Street is just going really tall, and the fruit are way up high. It means you either got to climb up and get them, or they fall down and smash.
You can grow to about 25 meters.
Yeah. So this is a guava, which probably needs replacing. It hasn't produced much, only one or two fruit. The problem with the guavas, I'm finding this with my own, is that the possums eat the young leaves. Well, other than that, they're very hardy and a very solid timber tree. There's one variety that grows as a weed around Brisbane, the orange one. This is actually a creamer one. And they will have two crops, a summer crop really prone to fruit fly, but the winter crop's normally free of it. And the other disadvantage of them is the hard seeds, as you know, when you try and eat them, they get caught in your teeth. We have got a smaller one over the other side that has soft seeds, the smaller fruit.
The smaller one,
The cherry guava.
Cherry guava,
Yeah, we're going to have a look at that.
Was that cut off as well for it to grow different? See that?
What's that?
See that cut? Was that cut to make it grow different?
No, I think
No.
it had a dying branch.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So I showed you the Japanese raisin tree, which is fully winter deciduous. This is another one that's fully winter deciduous. So this is a pecan. And as you know, in summer this is absolutely lovely green and shady. But in winter it's totally deciduous. So once again, it's a good one where you want to let that winter light in and provide the summer shade. However, it's a bit big for a home garden. I mean, this is just a medium sort of size one. You get quite a bit bigger than this. And the other problem with them is that this does produce quite good nuts, but about 2 weeks before they're fully ripe, the cockatoos come in and just strip the tree. And it's a bit big to net. Where they grow them commercially down around Inverell, they try all sorts of things. They mainly try the random cannons, you know, the boom, 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 boom. But the trouble is the birds get used to those after a while. So I'm not sure how they're going down there. But they are beautiful trees. They reckon that to get best pollination, you need more than one tree. I don't think they have to be different varieties, just the different trees. But we still get a reasonable nut set here, but I think if we had 2 trees, we'd probably get more nuts.
Another thing about pecan, remember the elm family? They send out roots, and as soon as it touches a tree, it kills that tree off.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's actually killing this tree off or not.
So they're like the walnuts in that same...
Yeah.
Yep.
Any root they touch, it kills off the other plant.
Well, that's interesting to know. You may well be right with that, because normally guavas are normally pretty tough.
Yeah. Because my neighbour's got one in his backyard, and no trees within 20, 30 miles from it.
20, 30 miles?
Meters, I mean, meters. 10 or so meters, yeah.
No, thanks for letting. I knew about the walnut.
They're in their own family, and they send out roots roots they touch.
They have chemicals in them.
Yeah.
Is that allelopathic?
Yeah, allelopathic, yeah. No, that's interesting to know. Yeah, and that would be the closest tree, so you're probably right. Yep.
Well, the elderberry's the closest one too, actually.
Yeah. Nothing kills an elderberry.
No.
So this is the elderberry, which has these white flowers that then turn into little black berries. And the flowers and the berries are edible. The flowers you can cook up in a batter and fry them, deep fry them. Or the other way you can use it for flowers is to make quite a nice drink. It's called elderflower champagne. You just put them in 20 litres, half a dozen flowers and 20 litres of water and a bit of sugar and some lemon juice, and let it ferment for about 2 weeks.
It's also the same for the cordial, elderflower cordial.
Yeah. But this one will ferment and get slightly bubbly, or then you bottle it. So I know you let it ferment for 24, 48 hours, that's right. And then you bottle it and leave it for 2 weeks. And then it goes slightly bubbly. And it's quite a nice drink. And you can actually make elderflower wine out of it. No, elderberry wine. You need the berries for the wine.
Wasn't that you, Joe, didn't you grab some of the elderberry?
It is a bit of it does sucker. So you've got to manage it. It keeps coming up everywhere. But you can hack it back and it'll come up again. And there is a native one that's got over there that's fairly similar. Not quite as big as... Yeah, that's right. So this is another guava, the cherry guava. Because when these fruits ripen, they get about 3 times as big as that, or 4 times as big as that, and they go red when they're ripe. It's it's not quite as sweet as the other guavas, and it's not as big a tree, and it's more, stays the same all the time. So it gets about that big, and you can make a nice little sort of shade tree out of it. It's pretty tough.
I like the texture of this one. It's sour and sweet.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, no, it's good.
What's the tree behind it in flower?
That is the Sabah nut, which is native to Sabah, which is Malaysian Borneo. And it has the largest fruit.
There's some on it.
That,
Yeah, there's quite a few.
yeah, you can see the young fruit, yep. Well, they'll get about twice as big as that, and then they'll start to peel open. And inside each fruit, there's 3 or 4, oh, there's one there that's almost ripe. But they'll have 3 or 4 or 5 nuts or seeds in them. And they're more like a seed than a nut, but they're quite nice. They're good eating. And it does seem to go really well here, and you can have a lot of nuts on them. Some years will just be kilos and kilos. Other years not so many. But
It tastes like chestnut.
yeah, a bit like chestnut.
People also call it a Malabar chestnut.
Malabar chestnut, yeah.
And they're wonderful sprouted too.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a dragon fruit coming through there. Yeah.